Welcome back. Today we're looking at a really comprehensive piece on the global coursebook debate in English language teaching. It covers the history, surveys, future research. It's solid work.
It definitely is. A very strong synthesis, pulls together a lot of key arguments. But to really elevate its contribution, especially thinking about methodology, well, we think there's a key shift needed.
Okay.
The chapters call for more empirical research. It needs to move beyond just sort of sighing about how messy classroom research is. It should be about actively designing studies that really put teacher and learner agency front and center.
Right, because as it stands, it does talk a lot about the messiness, doesn't it? Things like uninformed eclecticism, and it mentions studies where it was hard to get teachers to stick closely to the book.
It's the data if the book isn't followed to the letter.
Mm-hmm.
But that perspective, well, it kind of risks ignoring teacher agency, which, as folks like Graves have pointed out, is absolutely central to understanding teaching. It ends up treating that adaptation, that mediation, as just noise to be controlled.
Yeah, I see that. It's almost like saying the teacher's professionalism is getting in the way of studying the material, which sounds backwards.
It is a bit backwards, yeah.
So if we stop seeing teachers adapting things as a methodological hurdle, what's the suggested way forward for research design then?
Okay, so the core suggestion here is this. Focus research designs not on proving how effective the book itself is in isolation, but on systematically capturing how teachers and students are actually mediating and reinterpreting the material moment by moment. We need to flip the whole perspective.
That feels like a significant shift. So instead of adherence, we're looking at adaptation. How do you measure that messiness without getting lost in it? What kind of methods work?
Well, you'd lean into methods like detailed process tracing or really in-depth qualitative case studies that specifically track how teachers and learners are, reading their classrooms, as Alien Luntley put it. It's about observing the process, not just the outcome.
Can you give a concrete example? Like, what would that look like on the ground?
Sure. Think about maybe microanalysis of classroom talk. You could design a study that looks closely at a teacher's discourse, maybe their think aloud protocols, their choices right when, say, students are clearly not getting a concept presented in the book.
Okay.
You could compare how a very experienced teacher handles that moment versus how a novice does, using the same coursebook unit. And the key thing is, what the chapter currently calls uninformed eclecticism, that becomes your data. It's evidence of professional skill, of adaptation, not a research flaw.
Huh. So you're not trying to isolate the book's effect by controlling variables. You're embracing the variables to isolate the teacher's effect on the book.
Precisely. The goal becomes, like the chapter hints at, uncovering more about how different teachers use their coursebooks, compare their practices. That takes the thorny issue of research and practice and makes it the actual research question. It gives the whole methodology section a much sharper edge, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. It really reframes the challenge. Okay, so if we follow that logic, pushing the research towards agency and adaptation, that naturally leads us back to the materials themselves, right? Which brings us to the next point, building on that really insightful analysis of the language used about coursebooks.
Yeah, the discussion of factionalism and emotive language, that's a real strength.
Definitely.
And our point here is that this sophisticated analysis, looking at how both the pro and anti-coursebook camps use loaded language, well, that should be directly used to generate some explicit, actionable design principles for new materials. Principles that try to neutralize those rhetorical biases.
Okay, so take the analysis and turn it into design rules. Because the chapter does a great job laying out the linguistic battlefield, the anti-camp, using words like dictate, fail, oblige, painting the book as this straitjacket.
Right, and then the pro camp using positive framing, promote, provide. The weakness, though, is that this sharp linguistic critique mostly stays at the level of observation. It's insightful commentary on the debate's rhetoric.
But it doesn't quite bridge into, so what should publishers do about it in the recommendations?
Exactly. It diagnoses the language war, but doesn't quite weaponize that diagnosis for practical change.
Got it. So the suggestion is clear. Integrate this linguistic critique directly into the recommendations for practice. Design features into materials that actively push back against those negative metaphors, the straitjacket idea, and that mandate transparency about what a coursebook actually can and can't do.
Yes, make the analysis truly operational for the people writing and publishing these things. We need design features that kind of preemptively disarm those emotive criticisms.
Okay, concrete examples. How could a publisher, say, fight back against the idea that their book dictates the lesson?
Well, one idea, imagine systematically building in options, call them agency points or adaption options, right there in the teacher's guide.
But isn't there a risk there? If you just give, say, 3 predefined paths, aren't you just swapping one kind of prescription for another? Like choosing menu A, B, or C instead of just having the set meal? Does that really foster genuine agency?
That's a fair challenge. The key would be making the options pedagogically distinct. They can't just be minor tweaks. Maybe for each unit you offer, say, a high challenge path, focused on production, a low prep path, relying more on guided discovery, and maybe a collaborative path, turning it into a project.
Okay.
The point is, the teacher has to make a genuine pedagogical choice, based on their learners, their context. It's not just skipping exercise 3. That act of choosing immediately undermines the dictate or oblige argument. It builds flexibility in.
I see. It makes adaptation an explicit, expected part of using the material. Okay, what about the other side? The idea that sometimes textbooks get treated like they contain the absolute truth, everything needed. How do we use language or design to address the limits of the material?
By mandating transparency about scope. This connects back to O'Neill's old point about textbooks just being a base or core. Materials writers should, perhaps, be required to state explicitly what the material doesn't cover or guarantee.
Wow. Okay, so like a disclaimer in the book itself? A writer saying, this unit won't make your students fluent?
Kind of. Yeah. Maybe not that blunt, but imagine a standard note in certain units. Something like, scope limitation. This unit introduces the declarative rules for X. Achieving procedural fluency requires significant additional, personalized practice beyond these pages.
Huh.
It manages expectations. It fights the assumption that finishing the chapter equals mastery. And, crucially, it reinforces the teacher's indispensable role in bridging that gap.
Right. By being upfront about what the material isn't, you neutralize the potential criticism that it overpromises or tries to replace the teacher. That's quite clever, actually, using the rhetoric of limitation constructively. Okay, let's move to the final area we looked at, that rich synthesis of survey data from teachers and learners. There's a lot of good stuff there.
There is. It's a potentially powerful evidence base, but it needs maybe a stronger theoretical frame to really land its punch in the conclusion. Our thought is the synthesis of all that conflicting stakeholder data, what teachers like, what learners want, what they dislike, provides a perfect chance to empirically show how both the deficiency and difference views of materials can be true at the same time.
Okay, explain that a bit more. The weakness right now is that the survey findings often feel like, well, just lists. Teachers like consistency, but they hate inauthentic listening. They want structure and flexibility. It seems contradictory.
Exactly. And the chapter mentions Allright's classic deficiency and difference views, the idea that materials either make up for a teacher's lack, deficiency, or offer specialized expertise difference. And it says these can coexist. But the survey data isn't explicitly mapped onto that framework to prove the point.
So it states the theory, presents the data, but doesn't fully connect them to show the theory in action through the data.
Pretty much. It feels like a missed opportunity to use the stakeholders' own words to validate that nuanced theoretical position. So, the suggestion is, use the survey data you've gathered as direct evidence. Structure the final argument by mapping specific needs and preferences onto Allright's framework. Use the data to build the case for that measured position the chapter aims for.
Right. So stop just listing the contradictions and start using them strategically. Show how the data supports both views simultaneously.
Precisely. Let's make it concrete. You take the data points. For instance, highlight how teachers saying they value structure, coherence, a sense of progress, or needing a guide for the inexperienced, how that directly supports the deficiency view. The book is acting as a scaffold, compensating for lack of time or experience.
Okay, that covers one side. The book is a support system.
Then, immediately, you pivot. You use other data points from the same surveys like teachers wanting flexibility, a pick-and-mix approach, or wanting longer texts, or seeing the book as a springboard.
Ah, the springboard idea. That implies you need skill to use it effectively, right? It's not just a crutch.
Exactly. That links directly to the difference view. It positions the coursebook not as filling a gap, but as a sophisticated resource whose value lies in its specialized design, a value that requires teacher expertise to unlock through mediation and adaptation. It's useful because of the difference in expertise it represents.
I see. So by explicitly mapping the survey results this way, you show that the seemingly contradictory demands actually reflect these two valid, coexisting functions of a coursebook, depending on the user and the context.
Yes, and doing that synthesis provides that nuanced understanding the chapter is aiming for. It addresses the reality of heterogeneous teacher experience and moves beyond a simple for or against stance, using the evidence to ground the conclusion.
That really ties it together. It gives the conclusion that empirical weight derived directly from the stakeholder voices. Okay, I think we've covered some really crucial ground here to help sharpen this piece.
Yeah, the goal was really to push beyond the excellent synthesis and analysis already present, and think about maximizing the scholarly impact, making the arguments more actionable, more structurally embedded in future work.
So, just to recap the main suggestions. First, really reorient that empirical research agenda. Focus on studying agency and mediation directly. Treat teacher adaptation not as noise, but as the core data.
Second, take that sharp analysis of the emotive language used in the coursebook debate and translate it into concrete design principles. Mandate transparency and build in features that actively counter the negative rhetoric, using design to shape the conversation.
And finally, use that rich stakeholder survey data more strategically. Synthesize the conflicting views to empirically demonstrate the simultaneous validity of the deficiency and difference frameworks, grounding the chapter's nuanced conclusion in solid evidence.
Exactly. These steps, we feel, could really help transform this already strong review into something that sets a clear agenda for both researchers and materials developers in the field. We definitely encourage you to work these suggestions in and, of course, send the revised material back our way. We'd be happy to take another look.